The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Morning, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move a request for a select committee to inquire into and make recommendations to the House on all matters pertaining to the powers, privileges, and immunities of the members of Parliament, allowances and benefits of members of Parliament, and to inquire into the feasibility of the construction of a new parliamentary complex with power to send for persons and papers and with leave to sit from place to place and with leave to sit during the recess. In doing so, sir, I want to first thank the leader of government business who would ordinarily lead this debate, and to say that it is the intention that he will wind up the debate for the governing side. I would want to just say, by way of some preliminary things, that in coming to the House this morning, one of the things I did was I read an editorial in the Tribune this morning. And this was, in my view, an unseemly and vicious attack on someone who is now a public servant and would not normally be able to defend herself in the public domain. And what strikes me about these kinds of attacks that continue, particularly from that particular editor, is, as I recall it, these words have been used to describe people who are connected with us in various ways and on various occasions. One time we were monkeys, another time we were skunks, and another time we were crabs. Now, it just seems to me that this is not the kind of language that in any event should be employed. But fine, if that's, free country, say what you want. But whatever the individual who runs the Urban Renewal Office up in Grand Bahama has done or not done, it seems to me that that individual ought to be treated with a modicum of respect, not a modicum of respect, with respect. She does a job. You can criticize the way she does a job or not does a job, but it should be, individual should be treated with respect. And it seems to me that every time this kind of snide, nasty commentary takes place, which goes to the dignity of an individual, I think we need to stand up and just say at least something about it to defend it, because the individual themselves may not be able to do so. And secondly, yesterday while I'm sitting in the cabinet meeting, I received a phone call from, well, he's actually not one of my constituents. He's actually used to be in Ryan Pinder's constituency. I'm sorry, the Member of Parliament for Elizabeth's constituency before the boundary changes, and had come to see me because he was having a problem meeting some payments on a large complex that he had in which he lived. And obviously, whatever interventions I was able to do on his behalf didn't work. He is subsequently, I'm told, away having serious heart difficulties and is ill. And the bailiffs arrived with wife, children. There are 7 children in the home to repossess this place and to throw everybody out of the house. And we could not get anyone just to hold their hand just for a couple of hours until we could find some alternative place for these people to go. Now, again, the law is the law, and I suppose you're not supposed to have a conscience about enforcing these things. But I did call the partner of the law firm that's involved with this to try and see if I could get to the bottom of this. But this just seems to me, in this day and time, when everybody recognizes that everyone is severely challenged in this economy for this kind of thing to be taking place. And what disturbs me, Mr. Speaker, is this. The banks and the financial institutions are pretending in this day and age that they had nothing to do with the credit issues which now arise in the country. They pushed credit in this country prior to 2008, just pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. In my view, they're almost like the tobacco companies who now claim that they never knew that tobacco was addicting. but they were pushing smoking cigarettes to people. So banks busy pushing out credit, pushing it out. And now, when there's a collapse from the bubble that took place, they want to absolve themselves and wash their hands of all responsibility in these matters. It seems to me they ought to bring some kind of conscience to these financial institutions, to their actions. And I intended to follow up on it. I didn't want to call the institution's name because I want to call the managing director directly about this. Extremely disturbed about that. And that's where I'd like to start. And I start there because that's what members of Parliament do in the main. They represent people. And people who have, in some cases, do not have a voice of their own, from small things to large things. And we are called upon to do many things. In putting together the remarks that I want to say today, I was thinking how, Mr. Speaker, Christianity is what I call a deterministic philosophy or religion. This means, as I understand it, that if you do the things that are right in this life, and if you follow the teachings of Christ, which are principally, as I understand it, to love God and love your neighbor as yourself, then heaven belongs to you. So certain is the philosophy on this point that Matthew's gospel puts it this way: consider the lilies of the field, they toil not, neither do they sow. Yet Solomon in all his glory is not arrayed as one of these. And it is this quintessential Christian value which our Constitution says is the guiding principle of our nation. We profess these words with our mouths, and we sing them in song. But the question I have is whether we actually believe that. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, again as a preliminary point, against all the doom and gloom that we've been hearing over the past few weeks, simply because of the outcome of a referendum. I'm a public figure. I've been a public figure all of my adult life, and I've been a public official going on 20 years this May. And today, we are, I hope, debating a subject which goes to the essence of what public leadership is. The role of a parliamentarian, a member of parliament or a senator, and how the work of that public official is to be supported by the state. In dispensing this responsibility this morning, I plan to say some things which may be contentious or even controversial. I'm sure that no one will be surprised at either of those things, given who is speaking. But I have said many times in this place, no sense talking about freedom of speech if you're not prepared to speak freely, particularly when you are granted such a rare favor as I have had to be able to speak in the country's freest forum for almost 20 years. I'm therefore seeking to make the case today to ensure that the work of all of us as public officials is properly supported, and I will in the process describe the details of what our work often entails. And I also hope to speak to the process, in the process of some of the issues of the day. I believe, Mr. Speaker, in the Christian philosophy that if you do the right thing then, you can determine your fate and end up in the right place. And so today, I will do what I believe is the right thing to do. First, permit me, Mr. Speaker, to congratulate my honourable colleagues on the government side for the public policy which led to the referendum on gambling on the 28th of January 2013. It was the right thing to do. The people of the country voted no. People of the country voted no. And I read in the press this morning that the Prime Minister has finally answered his critics with regard to all of the rot that they've been spewing forth about this referendum that took place on the 28th of January. I want to put this effort this morning into what I'm about to say about so many policy matters, both now and in the future, into some kind of context. The context is some of the axioms by which I govern my public life, which are germane to the topic we are discussing today. First, the first axiom, Mr. Speaker, my private life is none of your business. But I try to conduct my private and family life with the same decorum and circumspection with which I conduct my public life. And part of that circumspection is to decry the prurient interest which too many in this society have about the lives of people other than their own. Secondly, a member of Parliament is at times a delegate, at times a leader, but at all times he is to bring his individual conscience to any cause or matter which faces him in the public domain and in his public duties. This means, at times, he acts how his constituents ask him to act, representing their views. Other times, he must act with his own deliberate judgment, and it is for the MP to decide when it is time to act and play what particular role. Thirdly, a member of Parliament is a member of Parliament for the whole Bahamas, and as such, any cause or matter which touches and concerns the Bahamas is a legitimate cause or matter about which he ought to know or be concerned in this regard. I made it a point in my own public life to visit and meet people of communities across the country, to listen and to hear their concerns and to represent those concerns as best I can. Most people know, of course, of my special love for Exuma and for Bimini, but it is a love for the entire country. Fourthly, members of Parliament and senators ought to be properly trained for their jobs. They must know the history of this country and the institutions in which they serve, and they must know the country and its people. May I say, as an example of this, the need to know your history is that many people do not know or understand how we, for example, have this prohibition against gambling in casinos by Bahamians in the first place. When casino gambling was added as an amenity to assist our tourism sector in the early 60s, the government of the day, after protest from the church leaders, agreed that Bahamians would not be able to gamble in the casinos. And for a long time, that kept Bahamian croupiers from being able to work in a lucrative industry. People forget, it's only in recent times that Bahamians were allowed to be croupiers. Before they couldn't. And so here you have this very lucrative sector. People get huge tips as being croupiers, and no Bahamians could be croupiers. So eventually, we looked at that, and the rules changed. And now, I would dare say, croupiers are almost 100% Bahamianized. And so we often ask ourselves at various junctures, how does the policy which was set 40 or 50 years ago make sense today? And so we review the question. And we need to understand that, Mr. Speaker, that nothing in the Constitution prevents or prohibits Bahamians from gambling. The provision which appears in Article 26E is merely a provision which says that if you do pass a law which discriminates against Bahamians as it relates to gambling, then that is permissible. It would, however, be useful to remove it from the Constitution, but it is not necessary to remove it in order to permit Bahamians to gamble. Fifthly, I believe that a member of Parliament, senator, should serve all people, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, sexual orientation, political opinion, whether disabled or not, Rasta or not, tattooed or not, earringed or not. You treat all people equally and serve all people. Now to the outcome of the vote. No problem with that. You know what my position was with it, so you know you wouldn't be surprised if I disagreed with the decision and said it was a bad decision. But whether or not it was bad or not is not my business. We put the matter to the people of the country, and they said no. So what part of no don't you understand? No is no. In fact, I said, when I spoke on the matter of morality and public policy, I said it wasn't really my business. But the point is, the vote took place. And the PLP caused it to take place in fulfillment of its promise to the electorate when it was campaigning for office to do so. The Prime Minister has said, Mr. Speaker, he was prepared for any outcome. And I'm happy that he's spoken to the matter. I repeat a law from physics. Nature abhors a vacuum. And if you let your critics run away with themselves without an answer, people will begin to believe their propaganda. One commentator accused the PLP and the Prime Minister of botching the referendum. That is utter and complete bollocks. Only in this country should such an ordinary event be transformed, transmogrified, if you will, into something so dire that the predictors were all around preaching doom and gloom. Doom and gloom if we voted yes, and doom and gloom now that we voted no. Nonsense. Nonsense. This is just an ordinary democratic event of which there will be many. And we just have to get used to it. Sometimes people will vote no, and sometimes they'll vote yes. In Switzerland, they vote on issues all the time. No big deal. So please, the doomers and gloomers, get over it. Get over it. The government has to govern. It is governing. There is no doom and gloom in this government, and there is no sense of failure. We are not messiahs. We are not messiahs. We are simply a government. It's done, and we move on. This Prime Minister was consistent. He said it would be a matter of conscience, and he stuck by that, even though many of us were saying, get into the race. But this is his government, and he ran it as he wished, with our leave and support. And there is nothing about this exercise above which I am ashamed. Nothing. I'm proud of him.
That's right.
Proud of my colleagues, and proud of the Bahamian people, even when I disagree with them. I'm proud of them. You see, this Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, didn't get up and say, like the one before him, that he was ashamed of the Bahamian people. He said he was proud of our democracy.
Yeah.
And that's the way the Prime Minister is supposed to act. But the usual suspects are piling it on. The Guardian, the Tribune, Front Porch, who doesn't even have the courage to use their own name, but has so much to say. Yeah. And Sharon Turner and Ian Strawn and Paco Nunez, and all piling it on. And I want to tell them, they are all wrong, wrong, wrong.
Yeah.
Merchants of doom and gloom, and they need to go get a life. I pledge to my constituents that there is nothing which has happened which fundamentally affects the government in this matter.
Absolutely nothing.
Its work continues, and we fully intend to serve our term to the best of our ability, fulfilling the promises which we made in the general election. It's jobs, it's the economy, and it's fighting crime. Jobs, the economy, and fighting crime. Now, who doesn't like that? They know what to do. I'm privileged, Mr. Speaker, to lead this debate. It is yet another in a list of matters which I have been fighting for since I got to this place, and which, as time is winding down, is on my list to get done. It's now or never. As I come to the end of my public life, these things become more urgent. It took me a long time to get here, and I can see the end of the road. This society has, for most of my life, rejected the ideas that I've had about the kind of society that I would like it to be. But What I can boast about is that I have never wanted to live in any other place. And one thing I can say is that it is the society which at least allowed me to make the argument.
Yes. Yes.
I think back, for example, when I was working at the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. I was quite naive. I thought you could make sensible, local, and rational, logical and rational arguments, argue for tolerance in society, and society would accept what you say with goodwill and equanimity. I was wrong then, and I've been wrong so many times. But we've progressed. In 1978, when I spoke up for the rights of LGBT people, I was crucified in the public domain. Now look, today we have an Anglican bishop, Leish Boyd, and the president of the College of the Bahamas, Ernesto Williams, able to speak freely in front of an official commission of the government and to say what they wanted to say freely. We have even had the Attorney General of our country appearing before an international body and committing the country to studying the issue. And I pause here to congratulate the Anglican Bishop Leish Boyd and the President of COBUS, Ernesto Williams, for the courage to widen the rights of the people of this country. But that's what public service is all about. And this committee that we are seeking to appoint today is about trying to buttress the work of public officials so they can do their jobs, which they are called to do, without fear or favor, and without having to expend their own personal resources to do so. I came to public service hoping to complete some grand task, Mr. Speaker, to invent some grand idea. But what I found out is the task of governing is rather mundane and ordinary. It's the small decisions that you have to make from day to day. We're not in the age of Pinling, where we have to decide matters of great moment like independence. That's not our job. We're actually the keepers of the legacy, to protect what was laid down for us. I often wish that I had been born in a large country with millions of people where I can make decisions that affect the world, but I was born in a small country. I am where I am, I love the country, and I make my contribution here. Small contributions to the larger good of the whole world. That's the grand idea. But I tell Foreign Service officers all the time, Mr. Speaker, size does not matter. Size does not matter. Pope John Paul II made it clear that each and every one has the right to exist and an intrinsic value. Someone got tickled. But size doesn't matter. Pope John Paul II said it clearly, that each and every one, each nation, whether large or small, has a right to exist and has an intrinsic value. This, then, is the backdrop to something that I've been fighting for to get some attention to for nearly a lifetime, to get parliamentarians proper support, to build a new parliament for this country. I said to my colleagues that I would not want, and I use these names as an example, Tyson McKenzie, who says he wants to become Minister of Foreign Affairs one day, or Ernesto Williams, the President of the College of the Bahamas, or Ashanti Benabi, who is now the Young Liberals chair, to run for office and win office and have to come to be members of Parliament using this building. I want to leave them another and a better place for them to do their work. And I want them, when they reach here, asking, well, you all had the chance to do it. Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you do it? I don't like this building. I'm quite plain about this. I don't like this building. It is inadequate, too intimate, not enough privacy, not enough security. It doesn't fit the image of a modern Bahamas, and we simply need to build a new building. When this building was built, Mr. Speaker, women were not members of Parliament, nor was it anticipated that they'd ever be members of Parliament. There was no sensitivity to the disabled. All of that we now have to take into account. You know, someone disabled wants to come up here. How did they get up here? There ought to be a suite of offices for both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. Proper dining facilities and meeting rooms for MPs, the Leader of Government and Opposition business, and the party whips. We started before. A design was approved for the old Royal Victoria Hotel site, a contest held, a winner declared, but the building was never built. So let's see whether we can get it done this time. I should like to tell you the story of Paul Adderley, the late Paul Adderley, and his loss in the 1982 general election. Mr. Adderley was elected to the House of Assembly in 1977 in a PLP sweep of what I believe it was then the Carmichael constituency. He lost it to Frank Watson. He lost it in 1982, Mr. Speaker. That is correct. Yeah. It was called Adelaide, maybe? Adelaide, yeah, sorry. It was called Adelaide. I wasn't certain. But he lost it in 82, despite being one of the hardest working ministers in the government. He was up at the crack of dawn, and you could often see him sitting in his car, he had a right-hand drive, in the General Post Office yard, early in the morning, catching up on the news before going to his office. But he discovered, to his chagrin, that what he did in ministerial office did not mean a hill of beans, apparently, to his constituents, and they voted him out of office. That helped me to form the view that what is needed is the necessary support for the work of an MP who is, in particular, a government minister. And we've gone some way in trying to deal with it by ministers being able to have assistants to help them. But the idea of having this committee is to look at a way of institutionalizing this support, not just for ministers of the government, because I think you get the principle, but for all members of Parliament, who I'm sure, since we don't have full-time members of Parliament, have their jobs to do and need the constituency support. In my view, I'm philosophically committed to this, that there ought to be power in incumbency. The incumbent ought to have things like a staff coordinator, mobile phone support, a constituency coordinator, a press attaché, secretarial assistance for the constituency office, a travel allowance for the entire Bahamas. All of this means additional costs, but I will propose a formula to the committee to consider how the House and Senate can get the resources for the work that it needs to do. This is like everything else today, I suspect will be contentious, but that's our system. But the problem has to be faced despite what is likely to be a heavy political and perhaps personal cost. It must be done so that the next generation of people who come here will not have this battle to fight. Hopefully, and if we are artful and determined enough, we will have designed, when we have finished, a system which will give flexibility to the next set of leaders of the country to determine the proper level of support for the work of members of Parliament and senators who come to serve in office. The idea is to put in place a system which will allow for constant review in a transparent and objective context on a regular basis so that the work of a member of Parliament or a senator is properly supported. Mr. Speaker, I made some personal choices when I decided to take this job on. I'd be a single man, no family, and I made this decision to be totally and absolutely dedicated to the one and only thing that I've only wanted to do in my life, which is the job I have now. to be a member of Parliament, to be a public official. The only thing I've ever wanted to do. And I'm totally dedicated to that. I said to people, you know, you don't have to... If you see me show up somewhere that you don't think that I should ordinarily be, you could only know there's one reason why I'm there, and that's politics. You don't have to guess, and I tell you now. You know? No, I'm saying, if you see me somewhere, that's right, that you don't think I'm not supposed to be, you don't have to guess why I'm there. I'm telling you, it's politics. That's it.
That is a good rationale. Each one of us should get up and say the same thing.
That's a place where I'm supposed to be. That's where I'm supposed to be. And
you know, really know scripture.
You know, it took me a long time to get here, fighting all kinds of things, disabilities, real or imagined, prejudice, hatred, but along the way, some great experiences of friendship, mentorship, loyalty, and trust. And I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, as some have said, that this is a dirty business. I reject that. In fact, I say that to those who naysay politics and public service, that it is no more dirty than any other public activity in which we are all engaged. And try to dedicate my mature adult life to encouraging other young people to come to public service, and to try to work toward building a tolerant, liberal society, remembering always that this is a secular state, not a theocracy, and that we must work for the public good and in the public interest. I said to my family that when Pope John Paul II died, he left only his Bible to his sister. And I believe that that may have been his only material property. And, of course, I've not been called to such a higher purpose, but I warn my family that when I'm gone, nothing will be left. All gone. I think all I will leave, sir, is enough to take care of the cremation, which I'm told is $1,500. Oh, thank you. That means I can spend that too. You promise now, right? But this is a personal decision. Deeply personal. It's not a stricture to be imposed on anyone else, nor to be recommended. For coming to public service, although a vocation or a calling, is a job. A highly visible job, but a job nonetheless. And for doing the job, you should be supported commensurate to the work you are expected to do, for the risks you are called upon to accept, and to be supported in the work by the resources of the state. What you bring to the table as an MP or senator is your mind, talents, your intellect, and intelligence to solve the great problems which confront the country, as well as the minutiae and nuts and bolts of the business of government and legislation. And I've served in various capacities. In 1977, there was a debate in this House when the late Sir Lyndon Pinling was seeking to put in place the salaries for parliamentarians and ministers and other officers of the state. The then Mr. Pinling said to the House that the salaries were being put in place to make it possible for men and women of modest means to run for office and to serve in office. This has always stuck with me. So I came to this job against the backdrop of my late first cousin once removed, Sammy Isaacs, who was almost consumed by the financial losses which he encountered as a member of Parliament, as a member of the House of Assembly. And my mother used to always warn me not to do it, Don't go into politics, because you end up backing notes for constituents who'll never pay you back. Always said it.
You are so right.
So the last generation put in place some things for us. They put in place the salaries, they put in place the pension, they put in place the constituency allowances. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, none of them are adequate, neither do they support fully the work which MPs and senators are called upon to do. If I may just break here, because someone had sent me a note where one of our critics had said something about MPs and senators living off the backs of constituents with their fat pensions after.
That must be the National Institute.
And I just the only thing I had to do was just remind them that the pensions for members of Parliament and senators are contributory pensions. I'm not sure how that's living off the back of constituents. I think it's a pension scheme into which we pay and contribute. The opposition, of course, almost never agrees to any measure which appears to move the process along. Because it's easy to argue when you're in opposition that all you're doing is seeking to fix yourself up. But I say that this is a matter of such importance to the future of the country and its ability to attract people of quality to service here that it must be fixed. And I think I'm prepared to take the hit for it and the risk, because, as I said, I'm nearer the end than at the beginning. This is not an exercise about salaries, and I want to make that clear. There's a mechanism to deal with that, and even though the committee, if granted, may make passing references to it, this is more about supporting the structures which MPs and senators have. And I commend the government, I commend to the government the idea that perhaps there ought to be a similar committee in the Senate. And the two bodies can work together to review these matters quickly and report at the earliest opportunity. I hope that we get a unanimous report, but I'm prepared to proceed with just a majority alone if others want to dissent, because it must be done. This is about suggesting some fundamental change in the way the House, the Senate, the Parliament, or legislative branch is funded and administered. And I've had the advantage of reading last week the views of the Honourable Clerk of the House, and I want to later on read, if I have the time, or certainly lay them on the table, to read with support into the records of the House, because I agree with the views about how the Parliament ought to be designed and what the House ought to, the new Parliament ought to look to. And the article appeared last Wednesday in the Nassau Guardian. And I would commend it to you, but as I say, I will lay it on the table when I'm done. The idea is, then, Mr. Speaker, is to delink the Parliament, its funding and work from the executive. The business, administration, and funding of the House is presently done through the Cabinet Office. The Cabinet Office can properly be the link between the two bodies, the executive and the legislative, but the House and the Senate should run their own affairs. The Speaker should be, and the President should be, corporation souls, with the property of the House and Senate vested in those respective corporations. We have to look at the constitutional consequences of this, if any, but I do not think there are any. There is an opinion, however, that there might be, and so the committee can investigate that fact. The House and the Senate, then, would be run by respective committees of the House. Let us say we call it the Administrative Committee, which will be a standing committee of the House. The committees will be chaired by the Speaker or the President, as the case might be, made up of 3 members of the majority, 2 members of the minority. And they will make the decisions for the day-to-day running of the House and its management, be responsible for relations with the Executive, the House, and the Senate, and negotiate the annual budgets of the House and the Senate. My suggestion is that the House and the Senate will then be responsible for the administration of all matters which affect the emoluments, allowances, and benefits of the House. The Parliament will be responsible for the administration of the following acts: the Parliamentarians' Constituency Office Allowance Act, the Parliamentarian Salaries and Allowances Act, the Parliamentary Pensions Act, the Powers and Privileges Senate and House of Assembly Act. Those acts, together with the Prime Minister's Pension Act, the Prime Minister's Personal Staff Act, the Public Disclosure Act, and the Constitution, in my view, will have to be reviewed by this committee. I have some suggestions. Pensions, for example, ought to be reviewed regularly, and members ought to know what the status of their pension is, how they can improve the worth of the pension. It is a contributory pension, and the value of it might be improved by allowance purchases, by allowing people to purchase additional benefits or to increase the value. When a member of the House or the Senate retires, it is the House or the Senate that should provide the services to that member to ensure that he is properly treated and dealt with such items as support for health care and pensions. Further, it is my view that when you become a member of Parliament, since you, or a senator, you are representing the entire Bahamas, that your work ought to be supported by some form of travel allowance. I commend, therefore, those ideas with regard to the structure of the governance of the House and how the allowances issues ought to be dealt with. And I've given a list of what I consider some allowances that might be considered. If I may turn once again to the construction of the new Parliament. This is long overdue. There were drawings done before on a site chosen at the old Royal Victoria Hotel, which is up the road at the top of Parliament Street. Unfortunately, the project was never completed, and I think it was announced when Princess Anne came to the Bahamas on the occasion of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the Parliament. We were founded in 1729, right, on the 29th of September, 1729. So 250 years from that. It was the year, I think there's a plaque Princess Anne unveiled, which is still on the site. So I would commend, Mr. Speaker, the construction of new premises. And I indicated that I would read, or attempt to read into the record some of the ideas of the Honourable Clerk of the House. And his suggestions are as follows. The complex should make provision for chambers for the House of Assembly and the Senate, should we retain the bicameral nature of the Parliament, built on two separate wings of the complex. Each chamber should have suitable galleries for the news media, the public, and specially invited guests of the President of the Senate and Speaker of the House. A modern parliamentary library easily accessible by both chambers and one which is fully equipped with reference books and other resource material should have trained staff that is available to assist parliamentarians with research. Each wing should include receiving rooms where the President and the Senate and the Speaker could receive visiting presiding officers and other dignitaries. Several committee rooms for parliamentarians to hold committee meetings, which should be equipped with video and audio equipment to televise and broadcast committee meetings when required. 2 caucus rooms where the political parties can caucus during House meetings and convene their parliamentary meetings. A room accessible only from the House chamber and available to members only, where they could have coffee or soft drinks and hold informal discussions. A dining room for lunch and dinner for members only and their invited guests. Adequate office accommodation for staff of both chambers. Accommodation for the Hansard Department. Accommodation for the electronic Hansard. A lunchroom for the staff of Parliament. A small gym where parliamentarians could work off the stress of debate. Bathrooms for members only. And public bathrooms. And under the rubric Other Features, he writes, the complex will require additional features. I am a strong proponent for full-time members of Parliament, as I believe that Bahamians are not well served by perpetuating the legacy of part-time members. This, too, would enhance the Parliament's independence. Now, I was reminding some of my colleagues yesterday that, you know, when the fellows used to govern us before, in the 50s, the meetings used to take place at night, and people had to dress in dinner jackets to come to the House. So maybe we can go back to that. That being said, says the clerk, I believe that provision should be made in the complex that this could be a separate annex for office accommodation for all members of Parliament. The members' offices should be outfitted by a staff member and computers and accessories which would facilitate members being more dedicated to committee work and to the development of legislation. The complex should also include entrances into the complex for members by vehicle that are separate from the entrance to be used by the public. The complex should be protected with a secured perimeter, monitored security cameras, and manned by professionally trained security personnel. Additionally, the parliamentary complex ought to have an expanded terrace where functions such as openings of Parliament, open-air concerts, and other performances could be held. The parliamentary buildings located in the public square, which were built by the Loyalists, are a continuous reminder of the legacy of those foreigners who came to the Bahamas in the late 18th century and became an important part of the parliamentary history of the Bahamas. I think the point being made here is that these buildings were built after the American Revolutionary War, and the architecture which the Loyalists brought to the Bahamas we see here now. I think these buildings were built in 1815. Yeah. So this is really architecture from that period, and was brought here by those people who came from the United States. And so he argues, a new parliamentary complex built by 21st century Bahamian parliamentarians, coupled with true independence of the Parliament, could serve as a permanent monument of democracy for present and future Bahamians, and will be a source of national pride for the centuries. And I commend this report. I'll lay the report on the table. So I want to say then, in summary, that we are at an important juncture. I don't want to make the moment any more grand than it is, or to speak in hyperbole, but to simply say we are at an important juncture when the right thing to do would be to review all of these matters, to see what we can do to support our work, to make sure that we, in doing this, will ultimately serve the greater good of the Bahamian people. The constituents who come to us expect for our mental energy to be focused on their work almost 100% of the time. All of these things that we are arguing for, I believe, would help and assist us to do this, because some of the administrative functions and other things which we are now called upon to do will be dealt with by other individuals. And it's important that the staffs of the various offices, should we go in this direction. Certainly, I say this to the staff who work in the Fox Hill constituency office, that when they deal with people, Mr. Speaker, they ought to deal with everyone equally, fairly, rationally, to not take umbrage because someone says something wrong or someone doesn't look like you want them to look. That's none of our business. Our business is to serve them and to see if we can take care of their issues and problems. I was, in speaking to the staff, telling them, do you know what it takes for a big grown man who has always been able to take care of his family and his expenses to leave his home at 8 o'clock in the morning and come to sit before a stranger and ask that stranger, sharing with him the most intimate details of his life, and to ask that stranger to help him because he can't help himself? it must be demeaning. It must be an emotionally tense time. And so if people fly off the handle, why would you be surprised at that? It's just a difficult, difficult time. But it's our role, if we can help to solve the problem, to resolve the issues, to help them. And so it is against that backdrop, with those words, that I think I commend to the House the request for this select committee. I hope that members speak to the issues connected with it and say how we can advance the work of the House, how we can leave our imprint for the next generation, and further ground our great pride in a wonderful country we have and a thriving democracy in what has got to be the best little country in the world.